Yeah, it's really sad. I'm in Florida, and tomatoes here. I got the numbers in front of me. In 2002, we grew 4.3 billion pounds. We're now down to 2.5. Again, back in 2002, domestic American tomato growers provided 70% of domestic consumption. Sorry, 80%. We supplied 80% of fresh tomatoes Americans consumed were grown here, and now Mexico provides 70% of that. So
Wow.
that's it's the
Completely flipped in 20 years.
yeah, exactly.
I'm Carson Jorgensen, and this is the Carson Jorgensen Podcast. Hey, everybody. One of the questions I'm most often asked when it comes to agriculture is how do we find your products, or where do we buy local? Folks, the guys at Crofter have been working on solving just that. They've created a marketplace that connects the producers to the consumers. You can get high quality products shipped to your front porch. Also, if you're a producer and you need an easier route to get your product to those consumers, visit crofter.com. Fill out the producer application and become a distributor on that marketplace. Again, that's crofter.com for high quality agricultural products shipped directly to your door. I want to dive into every facet of agriculture and what's going on in ag around the world, and especially here in the U.S. And with me today is Charles Benoit from Coalition for Prosperous America. He's trade counsel there. He's been instrumental on helping us with a bunch of things in the sheep industry. Chuck, thanks for coming on today, man. I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here. Thank you.
You guys are staying busy. I mean, we've never seen so much talk about trade and tariffs. I don't think in my lifetime for certain, but
Yep.
since the 30s, this really hasn't been a discussion. But now on every front, it seems like we're seeing tariff wars and trade wars, and it's all kind of coming to a head, and everybody's starting to talk about it. What do you think's driving this? Where did we come from, and how did we get here?
Well, I think one man is driving it, and I think that's President Trump. Um, and you're absolutely right. I mean, we just had the presidential debate between Trump and Harris, and the very first question was tariffs. So that's really, like, from a historical perspective, that's remarkable. So for me, this is like the most
Yeah,
exciting time ever. So this is great. Um,
I'll bet you're just licking
and
your chops.
Yes, yes. So, yeah, the future looks bright. I'm fortunately, of course, Vice President Harris was, despite the fact that the Biden-Harris administration maintained Trump's tariff policy, she's now mischaracterizing tariffs as a sales tax, which, unfortunately she didn't get fact checked on that. The fact checks only
Right,
seem to go
right.
one way there. Yeah. But yeah, no, very exciting time.
Yeah. So, I mean, when speaking specifically about agriculture, first, before we dive into that, maybe give people a little bit of idea on your background, and then we'll dive in. After that, I want to dive into, how are tariffs? I mean, we talk about it in ag all the time and how it's
Yeah.
affecting us, but give us a little bit about your background, and then we'll jump into that.
Yeah, so I mean, like, I'm a city boy, and I grew up in downtown Ottawa, Canada. So I'm like from the
Nice.
ranchers. I mean, you're the last person you kind of would maybe expect to be speaking to Western ranchers, but I actually do. I married into an agricultural family. Wife's whole family is in the dairy business. Father-in-law is a feed mill, and my mother-in-law grew up on a dairy farm, and all of her family's still a dairy farm. So I do have that
Awesome.
connection. And I've seen in Canada, they want to protect their dairy farmers. Full stop. The average dairy in Canada is still like 100 cows,
Wow.
and they don't allow imports. And for big dairy processors in America, it's been a big goal to break into. They think that they'll make a bit more extra money with
They
exports to
go to
Canada,
Canada.
and so they've been pushing, U.S. administrations is like make that a priority. And this is how badly Canada wanted to defend their dairy farmers. In the USMCA renegotiation, a concession Canada made is we want to protect our dairy farmers so bad that will pledge to stop exporting to other countries. So you with your giant, your giant processors can go and enjoy that gravy. We just want to protect our family dairy farms. So
Yeah.
kind of unthinkable in a U.S. ag policy space, but
I'm gonna say, but that's kind of unthinkable in Canadian ag policy anymore either.
yeah. Well, so on ranch, but on beef, they do whatever the big four packers tell them to do. They have the same
Yeah.
problems we have on beef, so it's just hit or miss depending on the product. Same as
No.
in America. In America, um,
Yeah.
you asked about ag and tariffs, and like this is totally underappreciated. This is a really important thing, and I think that the period we're in right now is akin to where we were 200 years ago. I think that that's the moment in time you have to go back to. And that sounds like a long time ago. Like I'm 42, but that's actually I'm old enough to know that a decade is like goes by like that. And we're a pretty young country. 20 decades is like if a decade's like that, 20 decades is not so long. And even though
Sure.
1824 sounds like a ancient history to a lot of us, but you can think of tariff policy as like studying, the ice packs. It's geological time frames. 200 years
Sure.
is
Sure.
yesterday. There's like 12 big things have happened in tariffs. So I can, I bear with me while I take us back.
No.
But during the, when we were still a British colony, Britain very much they were interested in our agricultural exports. They did not want us to manufacture, and so we, by the time 1789 comes around, we're dependent on exports to Europe and Britain in particular, and we really don't make anything. And that really informed our trade policy. You had Alexander Hamilton; people were famous, and the first Tariff Act of 1789, which set tariffs on uh, dozens of different products. It said we want to do it for protection and revenue, but ultimately we were still so dependent on trade with Europe. We did a free trade deal with them called the Jay Treaty, pretty much right away. George Washington wasn't happy about it, but he felt forced to. Otherwise, there's going to be more war because Britain they wanted those exports. But what ended up kind of breaking that was the Napoleonic Wars. And again, I know, just bear with me a few minutes here, but this is super important to today.
No, but the history
Um,
matters.
yeah, the history matters. To understand how we're going to get out of this mess, we have to look back because it's what worked before. Um, so with the Napoleonic Wars, we were getting disrespected. Our sailors, in the first decade of the 1800s, were just getting jacked at sea and, impressed. Learn about that a lot in history class. And, and then even Jefferson famously, who was like, all about it as exports and most of the, James Madison and the others, growing tobacco and cotton and they wanted to export, but they got cut off. And so Jefferson himself did the embargo act and said, we're so pissed at Europe, we're not trading with you anymore. And then, full on war broke out, the War of 1812. So that's when we kind of learned that, okay, we can't really count on international trade to grow. And so the war ends. In the British Parliament, they're openly talking about dumping on our market to destroy our producers. And that actually, we had the first so like with the 1789 tariff, there's some tweaks along the way, but then the next thing was 1816. Think of that as a big national security tariff. I hope that's the kind of what we're about to get again, and that's where we said, okay, relying on foreign supply chains, maybe not the best idea. We should try to be a bit more self-reliant, a bit more independent, and so north, south, everyone kind of agreed to drastically raise tariffs. We went from like a 5% average tariff to closer to a 25% average. Today we're at a 3% average tariff. Okay, so
Yeah.
And
If there
China
is a
is
tariff.
yeah, exactly. Most products come in tariff free. That's kind of what we have to get back to. Now, the Treasury Secretary in 1816 was this guy. His name was Dallas. So the 1816 tariffs, often called the Dallas tariff, and he had the a great insight into agriculture. So he's like, okay, if we gotta be increasing tariffs a lot. Europe's going to retaliate, and they're going to stop buying as much agriculture. So we need to what's the number one priority of farmers, ranchers is you got to get the best price for your
Sure.
crop. And the best price may be overseas, but they may not be able to get that best price. Um, and so, what are we going to do? And so that was a priority, was protecting ranchers and farmers as tariffs went up. And that led, and then Henry Clay was kind of a disciple. In 1824, he came up with the whole American system, and that's the tariff system that built our country. That made us the world's factory by 1900. And he becomes Speaker of the House in 1824. Gives this what's one of the most famous speeches in congressional history, where he introduces this um, the American system, and he goes through for agriculture crop by crop, and even on beef. And he said about everything. And he points to, he's like, look, Europe will only buy from us what they absolutely have to because they want to support their own farmers. And he shows that despite just over 20 years, so he's comparing to before the wars start to blockade. He compares 1803 to 1823, and he shows that we're a way bigger country. Europe's had a lot of population growth. Why aren't we exporting a lot more? Exports haven't grown because you have the occasional good year, but then you have a bunch of bad years.
Sure.
And I've got it here for yeah. So in 1803, 77,934 barrels of beef were exported. And then 20 years later, 1823, it was down to 61,418.
Oh,
So beef
wow.
exports have gone down. And this is what we find today. Nothing's changed. And so a lot of his speech was dedicated to, especially the cotton and tobacco growers in the South who wanted to keep their market access to Europe. He's like, look, guys, but we're going to grow. We're going to build our home market. You're going to have a big market here in the United States, but we have to grow our economy and get jobs back. To do that, we have to raise tariffs, and we expect there'll be some short-term pain, but we're going to take care of you. That's exactly like, fast forward to 200 years later, it's exactly what's happening now.
Sure.
So in 2018, that's when Trump did it was the biggest tariff action in a century, easily, since I would say since 1920, when farmers got the emergency tariff benefit. But
Right. Right.
it was to not jump around too much. But yeah, so 2018, Trump hits about half of what China sends us in a given month. It depends on the month, but between 30 to 45% on average. About that percentage of their exports were hit with a 25% tariff, and they retaliated just like the
They said they
Europeans
would.
200 years ago. They said they would, and they did. And our soybean exports fell from like 12 billion to 4 billion in the space of a year. So that was,
And kind of corn did the same thing.
yep. So that's right, corn. But the Trump administration, they dispersed 12 billion in 2018 and 16 billion in 2019 to help with that retaliation. I can't speak to. I wasn't at USDA, and USDA has got a ton of problems and a ton of flaws, as we know.
Sure.
So I'm sure that could have been done a lot better. But it was, they were venting everything. I mean, we haven't done anything like this in a century, so they were figuring it out
Sure.
as they went along.
Making it up as we went.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but the point is, farmers were not forgotten. And then it's interesting. China really couldn't sustain the retaliation. Pay more just to buy them from Brazil. So by 2022, soybean exports were back at record profits.
Yeah, but I think that's a part that everybody fails to mention and nobody actually wants to talk about because they say, "Oh, China's going to retaliate. They're going to do this. They're going to do that." And yeah, they did for a second, but what the world and what we as Americans don't realize is the world needs our market. They have to have it, and I mean, this is the deficit we run into with trade all the time, especially in the lamb deal, or where you and I have worked together on, is they need us. We're
Yes.
running trade deficits to everyone in just about every agricultural sector except for, I believe, corn and soybeans. I
So
think
that's
every
a
other.
super important point that Congress doesn't appreciate. Sorry, go on.
No, no, and that's just it. We run this deficit, and everybody says, "Well, they're going to retaliate." It's like how? How are they going to retaliate? The only place they can retaliate is corn and soybeans. They they run we run a deficit and everywhere else. How are they going to retaliate on those? And that's a point that I think, like you said, Congress misses all the time, is that they really need us. They're the ones making money. They don't have anywhere else to go with their product except to bring to the United States, because as of 2019, 2020, we became a net importer of food here in the United States. We're importing now than we ever have. And here's where we're at, but they need this market. And so that's the upper hand and the leverage that we have, and that we should, in fact, be using, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, and President Trump, like, and he says that explicitly. Like, he understands that leverage, and even Ambassador Tai, President Biden's trade rep, she says the same thing. She says, she calls it our superpower, which is like, I don't really think of like import dependence as a superpower, but I guess
Right?
if you're a trade negotiator, she's recognizing that she has all the leverage. But that's
Yeah.
such an important point, because one of the things I lament. I mean, President Trump gets it, but um, especially Republicans on the Hill, they don't. Most of
Yeah.
them, and some do, of course. Senator Hawley, Rubio, and others, but the majority don't, including the ones on Senate Finance and Senate Ag. Looking at Chuck Grassley in particular here,
Sure.
they don't get it, and whether it's like the proteins, all meat, seafood, fruits and vegetables. Um,
Yeah, because
what
let's hit that for a second. Because what have we talked about this year? What have we talked about? Shrimp in Louisiana. We talked about Indian shrimp. We've talked about crawfish. We've talked about rice. We've talked about lamb. We've talked about blueberries. There's a bunch of others too that these people are going to their congressional members and saying we are dying and the imports are killing us.
Yeah, it's really sad. I'm in Florida, and tomatoes here. I got the numbers in front of me. In 2002, we grew 4.3 billion pounds. We're now down to 2.5. Again, back in 2002, domestic American tomato growers provided 70% of domestic consumption. Sorry, 80%. We supplied 80% of fresh tomatoes Americans consumed were grown here, and now Mexico provides 70% of that. So
Wow.
that's it's the
Completely flipped in 20 years.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, the cartels are getting involved. A lot of drugs come in. Horrible working conditions. The Department of Labor finds forced labor and child labor in Mexico for tomato production. So yeah, I mean that's just but it's across the board. There's so many. Um, and crawfish comes up, like that's one I can't believe it. I'm so disappointed in the Speaker of the House. He's got this China Week coming up right now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Tell them about this.
yeah, it totally flaked out. So he's there's nothing of substance that really moves the needle in the bills that were announced that were going to be part of this China Week. And for crawfish, our speaker's from Louisiana, and it's one thing. Okay, you're getting and ranchers are getting displaced from Australia and New Zealand. Well, everybody likes those countries. You put in the menu New Zealand lamb, and it sounds fancy.
Sounds exotic, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know things to do
Chinese.
with.
But let's talk
But
about
the
Chinese
crawfish, yeah,
crawfish.
the crawfish is from China, and you're the Speaker of the House, and you're from Louisiana, and you can't shut this down. Like they would have built a statue to him back in Louisiana. So,
Yeah.
but this is the powerful forces, and in ag especially like Cargill and whatnot. Although, actually, I'm gonna have to fact check myself, but Cargill, I almost my jaw dropped. I believe is now on cooking oil from China.
Oh,
They're pro
wow.
tariff. So used cooking oil imports from China. Yeah, so there you go. You got the uh, even the that's what I love about China.
Even one of the big packers, they know no loyalty, man. They'll go after anybody.
Yeah, what we had to deal with for most of my career is that China makes a handful of people really comfortable, and those people are very powerful in Congress. and someone's making a lot of money, and so we don't get needed reforms to save the country. But we're at the point now where China's eating everyone's lunch. Like in automotive, this is huge, right? All the Western,
Yeah.
American, European automakers, they're just done in China, and so that's totally changed. That's helped. General Motors, when GM comes out pro tariff, that's like that really helps, you know,
That
make
helps.
Congress
That's still
understand it's okay.
downstream.
Yeah, yeah.
No, but that's just been the problem in agriculture for so long. It's such a small amount of people. I mean, it's less than 1% of the population. They don't really have a voice when it comes to this, when in fact they're probably the most used thing in everybody's everyday life. And the fact that it's getting neglected on a huge scale like it is, people worry about, I've said this before and I'll say it again 1,000 times over. People worry about chips being made in China. People worry about cars being made. People worry about their washing machine being made in China, but you're not worried about your food coming from China. Like, that makes no sense to me, and it makes no sense coming from Congress. That is what I don't understand. Why is it? And I mean, this might be a rhetorical question, but why is it Congress won't touch it? Why is it that they don't understand what's actually happening to our agricultural sector when it comes to trade?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, I have my own views. I think consolidation is it's another way you're hurt by consolidation. So, in 1964, ranchers had a huge win in Congress. That was, after we wiped out most of our agricultural tariffs, following World War II, and beef imports surged throughout the 1950s, and ranchers lost a huge chunk of the. I can't remember off the top, but it was a sizable chunk of the domestic market was lost to imports.
Well,
But
sheep
I guess that,
industry post World War II to after World War pre World War II, sorry, to post World War II, we lost half of the sheep industry in the United States, from 56 million to about 25 million.
yeah, so it was hard times back then, but for whatever reason, there was still enough support in Congress in the Western states with your delegations that you got the Meat Import Control Act of 1964 that set a quota. Now it was a hard fight back then, and President Johnson, he did not support you. He opposed you and was working hard, he got some presidential waiver tariff authority. So that quota program, for the few decades it was around, was kind of undermined in critical ways each decade. But nonetheless, you still had the Western congressmen and Western senators in a much better place than they are now for the most part. So and why are so many Western state representatives and senators not on top of it? To me, I look at the great consolidation data that RCAP's put together, and that kind of tells me a bit. And you look at the Packers controlling the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and the checkoff and everything, and I mean that kind of money and influence, it just totally distorts.
Sure,
And
sure.
yeah, so
I mean,
that's
but
a
you look
that's a
at the
huge
money
challenge.
that the Packers can put in versus the money that the producers can put in. I mean, the producers can put in a finite amount of money compared to what the Packers are.
Yeah,
They'll dump all this money into their propaganda machine, into their lobbying efforts, into all of it, buy them off at the top, and that's the end of it for the little guy. But you touched on something there a second ago that I really want to go back and dive into, and that's the free traders, because you hear so many of them like, oh, free trade this, or we just got to keep free trade. Well, free trade, I'd like to try that sometime, because I'd really like to see that happen, because I have yet to see free trade, because in my opinion, free trade doesn't exist.
that's right.
And you hear so many of them on the hill, oh, free trade this, free trade that. No, when you start to look at free trade, if let's talk about regulation for a second. Here in the United States, we are regulated higher than anywhere else probably in the world. Yet, are these other countries that are importing into our markets, are they being made to meet the same regulations that we are? They claim they are, but we all know that they're absolutely not. Let's talk about labor costs, cost of living, child labor, slavery. All of these things are being put into it. I mean, look at the Uyghurs in China. Look at what the cartel's doing in Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, all of these places that are really participating in terrible practices, especially in agriculture, deforestation in Brazil. There's so many different things that we're being made to play by, but yet they don't, but the door is wide open. So you hear free trade. But to me, we've never had free trade.
No, yeah, there was yeah, Senator Taft of Ohio from this is before just during World War II. In the 1940s, he assailed them. He called the Utopia Planners, and they were coming up with the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. People don't realize it's still around today, and it governs 99.9% of global commerce, and it's this horrible yoke, these chains that we've been living under ever since then. But back then, he said exactly what you're saying. He's like, "What do you call, utopia plan? Like, you guys are crazy." Um, and free trade. He's like, "Well, he just focused on labor. Back then, an Englishman earned far less than an American, and he just points like, how are we supposed to compete? How is it free trade when the Englishman makes half of what an American worker makes? Of course we're going to lose our factories. So, so yeah,
Well, not only that, but look at the dollar right now. I mean, you look at the discrepancy between our dollar and other countries. I mean, at the time when we were pulling this data and statistics for the sheep industry, it was $1 in the US to $1.62 in Australia. I mean, they're
it's
nearly
funny.
doubling. They're
It's
nearly
funny that you mentioned.
doubling their money by sending it here.
So it's funny that you mentioned the dollar. So I'll talk about it's bad to be a pro tariff a tariff fan because you can't have any you know uh, every president was bad until Trump. Okay, Trump is the only president who's moved us in the right direction. So you mentioned dollar and the currency.
Yeah,
Um, the GATT, which was 1947, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, it was part of this. It was like it came right after on the heels, part of this larger Bretton Woods in global. Like, I mean, they were going to plan the whole world back then. But it came
sure.
so under Bretton Woods, all the currencies were supposed to be pegged to the U.S. dollar, and the U.S. dollar was pegged to gold. So that was supposed to be the control there. We got off that in 1971, and Nixon unfortunately missed a huge opportunity. As soon as Bretton Woods was over, Nixon should have ripped up the GATT, and we should have gone back to the drawing table on tariffs, and he didn't do that, and that was bad.
Yeah.
You know.
But I mean, that's just it. We're not compensating for inflation in our tariffs. We're not compensating for
Oh,
tariffs
I got some.
or
I
for
got
the
some.
dollar.
I got to share some
Oh, yeah.
statistics with your listeners. So in agriculture, this is another way you guys are so screwed. Is a lot of our tariffs, they're not what we call ad valorem. They're not percentages. They're what are called specific tariffs, which just means it's like a dollar or cents, right, normally cents per unit of volume. It's a metric system now, so it's the most common is cents per kilogram.
Yeah.
And here's what I love. So the tariff uh, our tariff on our bad countries, which are column two of our tariff schedule, which is only
Bad
actually
country.
like yeah, it's right now it's we've got two columns, one for the whole pretty much the whole world, and then column two is just for Russia, Belarus, Cuba, and North Korea. So the but I love the history. So it was 1824 they set the tariff on ham and bacon at 3 cents a pound. I hope I'm getting this right. 3 cents a pound. Today, it's 7 cents a kilogram. It's never been adjusted for inflation.
Never
So
been adjusted for
yeah,
inflation
and
since
that
1824.
1824, 200 years later, and the same tariff, albeit adjusted for metric, is in the tariff schedule. And we have an even lower rate for every other country that's not those four. I think that
Everything
was
else.
I can get into the split, but yeah. So it's a joke. Yeah, we the 1934. Just if you want to remember a year, that's the year everything went off the rails. Up in 1934, Congress just like whatever, and was mostly
Wrote
Democrats,
it up.
but they just they tossed tariff authority to the president, and we've never had a serious holistic revision since then. So
Well, not only
yeah.
that, I mean, it's not just with tariffs either. You and I have talked about this fairly extensively when getting to know what's happened. And I tell people this and I try to explain it as best as I can. But our Congress allots money to send to other countries to develop their markets, to turn around and bring products back to the United States.
Hmm.
And people are like, oh, this
Hmm.
is not happening. No, it's
Oh,
happening.
no.
I want to
Yeah.
explain that to people and how that actually works and that we're about to institute that again.
Yeah, yeah. So again, I got to give you the historical background, but maybe in some ways we were a victim of our own success. So by the end of the 1800s, we are just crushing it. We are by far the most advanced nation on earth. and the envy of the world, reinvented the middle class, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but we were I guess kind of, what happens when you're this rock star is, everybody owes you money. So we're exporting, we're so good at making stuff that, whether it's manufactured goods or agriculture, the rest of the world is running up debt to us, just like we all owe money to China now. That we used to be like
Yeah.
that. Everyone owed
We
us
used to be
money.
the ones they were paying.
So we became a big creditor nation. Uh, that's that, and then we became a creditor nation during World War One, and then it really went off in 1920s with all the rebuilding. When I say we're a creditor nation, it was mostly Wall Street banks, and they were directly lending money to European governments for rebuilding and everything. But then also just our we had global steel companies and whatnot, and they're generating IOUs from other countries. So, but this is a problem. We had all these currency crises, and well, these invoices are in U.S. dollars. There's literally no U.S. dollars in these countries, so all they can do is like barter essentially. And the powers that be, Wall Street banks and our biggest multinationals in the 1920s and whatnot, were saying, "Oh man, this is a real problem. They literally can't pay our invoices because they don't have dollars. How can they get dollars? Export more to America." And so that's when we first were like, we should be promoting imports so that our biggest and most powerful and our banks can get repaid. Cordell Hull was the champion of that. He blasted when he was the DNC chairman in the 1920s. He blasted the Republicans for the Republicans had the Ford-McCumber tariff in 2022, which raised tariffs a lot, and then we had the Roaring Twenties. You never hear about that. And he blasted them
Right.
because as imports went down, we just kind of took haircuts on what we were owed in terms of the banks, which was the right thing to do. Right now, we all agree
Sure,
because
sure.
we crushed Germany economically and it led to Hitler and everything. So we all kind of agree that maybe we shouldn't have. We should that it was the right thing to do to cut down our debt payments. But anyway, so that's when, yeah, in the 1950s, it was really bad. Department of Commerce was actively promoting imports to the United States so that other countries could have dollars to pay their debts. And that was the U.S. policy for a long time, overtly, explicitly, like we advertised it. And on the trade front, there's still all this legacy. So you still see that that we're still promoting imports.
Yeah, we're actively investing in industry in other countries with American dollars to build their economy so they can send it here and undermine it. And this is happening. They're looking to
Yeah.
put it in the farm bill. They're looking to put it in the trade bill. Like they're looking to do it in all of these sectors right now and reinstitute them.
Yep, trade and development. It's this whole trade and development world. There's a lot of a lot of people in DC. I'll just say a lot of young women. It's like you go to bar and everyone's working in trade and development. But yeah, and we spend money to build productive capacity in agriculture. Certainly is a big focus. And they don't really say anymore. They do on like private PowerPoints and whatever emails and stuff that we can get a copy of. But yeah, you got the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. There's many more where they promote other countries' productive capacity.
Yeah, so essentially this is what's happening. We're borrowing money from other countries to send to other countries to then turn around and send products back to the United States to undercut our domestic market. This sounds like a really profitable business. And I think that that's why Trump was so successful. He stepped back and looked at the country as a business and that everybody has taken advantage of us for far too long. And I mean, to me, that's what the America First agenda is. It has nothing to do with Trump. It has everything to do with its time we put American first, whether that's manufacturing, whether that's agriculture, whether it's any of that things. That's why I think that initiative is important. And then we not make it about one person, that we make it about a movement that we have. But you're starting to see some things be brought back. You're starting to see some manufacturing be brought back to the United States. Some clothing companies are starting to make stuff in the United States again. And I believe that they're being fairly successful and they're actually starting to be fairly competitive on the world market again. And is this something you see? Is this something we should expect to see in the near future? What do you see going
Yeah, so
forward?
we are seeing in automotive, like the automotive broke. To my view, it was cars that just broke this, 80-year GATT chains that we've been living under. Cars are just a bridge too far, and you
Not
know,
food, just cars.
yeah,
Like,
unfortunately. So, like cars, everybody wakes up and, and well,
yeah,
and steel was all, they require such a huge upfront investment. Steel always did, right? But although steel, we've been was bleeding out for a long time too until Trump. So, it really was cars. Cars was just the thing. Like, okay, we don't care what the rule book says. We're not just going to let China take over our car industry. We're just not going
sure,
to. I think cars. I mean, it was Trump singularly, like the man. I mean, when he's redefined the Republican Party and he's bringing it back to its roots. So I don't I shudder to think of, like, well, if we didn't have Trump, if we had a conventional Republican, I mean, I look to Europe. China's made major progress, major inroads on automotive in Europe, and so kind of like that's the cautionary tale right there. And the German auto industry at this point is not German; it's Chinese. Like the
sure.
German car CEOs, they say what China tells them to say, and they've all lobby against Europe having tariffs on Chinese cars. Suicide. So anyway, Europe's going to lose its car industry. I mean, China will own its brands. The brands will stick around, but they won't be. That's already happened for a number of their brands.
Yeah.
But
You've
agriculture,
seen it
man,
in the
like,
gas company, you've seen it with optics, you've seen it, they've all outsourced to the Eastern countries. I mean, they have all gone to China and Japan and everywhere else. Nothing's made where they say it's made anymore.
and I really do worry about agriculture. In Florida, I mean, it's so bad on fruits and vegetables, and Senator Rubio and Senator Scott, like they know that they got a huge problem. It's vis-a-vis Mexico, which makes things tougher, but um, like, yeah, the Western states, it's really discouraging. You guys are in a lot of trouble, and you really need a lot of new political, we need a lot of Republican changeover. But look, I want to say some good things. Like Senator Hawley, Missouri is not a Western state, but it's to me, it's not a ranching state or a big one, or is it? Tell me if I'm wrong. But
Yeah, it's not bad. Yeah.
okay. Well, I'm a huge fan of Senator Hawley, and he managed to get elected in an off year, right, and a non-presidential year, and he ran on a pro-tariff platform alongside with Trump, and that was very hard for him to do because Missouri was a major soybean exporting state, and there was a lot of
Sure.
opposition. So it can be done. So and yeah, but we got like people like Senator Thune is another one. I mean, he might be the new Mitch McConnell, and he doesn't get it at all on trade.
No. No, and that's what's so difficult to watch is watching them just say, "Hey, agriculture doesn't matter." And even at the top level, I mean, you don't see any of the presidential tickets really talking about it. You do see JD Vance talk about it on occasion, give him
Yeah.
credit where credit is due.
Oh,
JD will talk
yeah.
about it. But the
Yes,
top
JD
of
is
the
great.
the top of the heap, they don't. You don't see it mentioned in the debate. It's funny. The first question they ask in the debates about tariffs, yes, but then they never talk about agriculture. It's always about manufacturing or other things. But agriculture is probably being affected more so than any industry by trade, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, certainly. It's like, and it's funny, kind of going pretty heavily on the carnivore diet and everything, and paleo and whatnot. And it's all the food I care about we're losing. Like, I'm
Yeah,
doing everything I can to avoid refined carbohydrates, and it seems like,
right.
it's like that's all we actually grow anymore.
So
Yeah.
it's all we have now. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Um,
all you could afford, anyways.
yeah, exactly. All the processed crap. So,
No, but
um,
you do see JD Vance talk about it a little bit, and that does have me hopeful that that might be, more key in this next administration, that they'll put some of the right people in the right places to make the calls.
yeah, no. So that was huge for me. Because I deal with a lot with Republicans on Capitol Hill, and very few are, really aligned with President Trump. It's a minority. So I was worried President Trump's not young, and like, what's the future of the Republican Party going to look like when he's not going to live forever. But him picking JD as his running mate gave me a ton of hope, that JD's really young, that we're not going to slip back into the old Republican Party of the late 20th century.
Yeah, no, and we've seen that shift, and it's funny you say that. Me being the chairman of the Republican Party prior, and being delved deep into Republican politics, absolutely, people are like, Trump's taking us backwards. He's not. No, he's taking us back to the original Republican Party, and I think it was you. And if I can find it after this is over, when I post this, I'll post that the banner from that
Yes,
original
please do.
Republican Party that has the platforms on it that talks about trade and tariffs in there, especially in agriculture. And to me, people are like, oh, they're taking us backwards. I'm like, that is incorrect. They're actually putting us back to where we were and where the Republican Party actually started. What do people need to pay attention to? What do people need to know about trade and
Oh
tariffs,
yeah.
and what can we do to turn the ship around?
What they need to do is be unafraid and unapologetic to say, protect our home market. Okay, protect our home market. Forget about you. We should not believe in rules-based trade. Okay, rules-based trade is like, oh, Americans can compete with anyone in the world so long as we have a level playing field. What level playing field? There's never been, there never will be a level playing field. And
Yeah.
and what are you saying? If we somehow did have a level playing field, we're willing to accept losing? Like we're willing to accept, oh, our farmers were outcompeted, so we don't grow food anymore. Is that like challenge them? When you meet a free trade Republican, say, what do you mean by free trade? Like, if we get
Free trade. I'd like to
outcompeted,
try it sometime.
yeah, if we get outcompeted, are you willing to not have any more food grown here? Are you willing to not have any cars made here? Challenge them on that. What? Oh,
Yeah.
no. Okay, well, what's your limit? So be very assertive, reject their underlying assumptions of their whole framework, and you tell them we got to protect the home market. We do that with tariffs. Quotas are another mechanism, right? So, with tomatoes, it's like adding a 25% tomato tariff. It's not going to do anything, but
Not
you,
going to
you
do
use
it.
you use quotas to cap. Say, okay, well, there's whatever 2 billion pounds of fresh tomatoes that we're going to need several years to rebuild our domestic capacity to get that part. So we have this quota, and we'll allow in, X volume, in duty free. But you give domestic producers certainty to plan, to grow, and rebuild the farms. So
But
that's
that's why
don't.
nobody's expanding right now, because they don't know what the future looks like, and nobody thinks it's going to be profitable. So nobody expands. And so we're in this never ending cycle of contraction.
So people got to talk to their congressional delegation. It's at the end of the day, the Constitution says the tariff power belongs to Congress, Article 1, Section 8. And the president's got all these like statutory delegations of authority that he can use. None of them are really intended to be permanent. And for the point you just said, farmers need long-term certainty, like to make the investments so we can feed ourselves again. And so that's why it really should be Congress in the driver's seat on this policy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Chuck, thanks again for joining
Yeah,
me,
thanks
my
so much,
friend.
Carson. This
It's
was a lot
always
of
a
fun.
pleasure, and it's a confusing thing for people to delve into and understand, but we've got to start somewhere. So thanks again for taking the time, man, and then we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Carson, for take care. Have a good day.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you turn on your notifications so you know when we release a new episode. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all soon.